Good morning and welcome back to Coffee with Craig, where we talk about all things firearms, firearms policy, politics, culture, media, you name it. We're talking about it right here on Coffee with Craig. Also, please take a moment to like and share this program. And remember, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook, and in both cases, hit the notification button. Also want to remind you, please visit us at fpcgear.com. That's fpcgear.com. Folks, this is how we pay the bills. Instead of just asking you to give us money, well, hey, we propose, how about let's do some commerce. You guys get Pro 2A swag, t-shirts, coffee mugs, hoodies, and we get contributions in order to help us in the fight for our right to keep and bear arms. So you can support the Second Amendment and you can look good doing it. Hey, that's fpcgear.com. All right, I'm sure that our audience, or my audience, I'm sure you guys are no strangers to the fact that folks are trying to sue firearms retailers and firearms manufacturers. And their premise basically is that, well, hey, if someone goes out, if they take a gun and they go shoot somebody, you should be able to, or commit suicide, they should, which I guess if they're committing suicide with a gun, they're shooting somebody. But that you should be able to go and sue. You should be able to go and sue the people who made the firearm or the people who sold it. Now, we already know that firearms retailers are protected under the law from those such lawsuits. Not against lawsuits that, your gun blew up in their hand where you actually did something wrong. But in this case, simply because you sold it to somebody or you manufactured it and somebody bought it who did something wrong. There's a case that's going forward. It's a case by the folks from Sandy Hook that is being allowed to move forward that has a little bit different perspective, and the courts are allowing it to move forward. So with that, I wanted to have on a friend of the show, a friend of mine, someone who could talk to us and help us to understand a little bit better about what these folks are trying to do and what the courts, quite frankly, are allowing them to do in this particular case in terms of suing Remington. And with that, I would like to welcome John Richards from No Lawyers, Only Guns and Money. John, how you doing today?
I'm doing fine this afternoon.
Oh, excellent. So, tell us a little bit about what you know about this lawsuit.
Well, the lawsuit was thrown out in the district court level in the state court in Connecticut. A couple years later, it finally ends up in the Supreme Court of Connecticut. And when it should have been thrown out, it was actually, they let the case go forward. They said the lower court had made a mistake. And they said that the Connecticut Unfair Trade Practices Act was a, quote, predicate act that would have been allowed under the Protection and Lawful Commerce of Arms Act, and therefore it could go to trial. Obviously, Remington and the other defendants actually don't want to go to trial because it's expensive. Basically, what the novel theory is that the advertising of the gun industry was so immoral and outrageous that it induced this disturbed young man, into committing the heinous crimes that he did.
Right. So now that's kind of along the same lines as the example they used is in the tobacco cases.
Exactly.
Right, where they actually went after the tobacco companies and basically said, well, hey, they were marketing these things. Now, here's the other thing, and this is what I noticed in the article that I read, was that part of it may not necessarily even be that they believe that they're going to be able to be successful. They largely believe the whole point is they want to go out through the discovery process. There's a bunch of stuff that they believe they'll be able to find and expose about Remington and their advertising and their marketing practices.
Yeah, they're taking a leaf directly from the litigation against the tobacco companies. But truly, the major difference between a tobacco company and the arms industry is that your R.J. Reynolds, your Philip Morris, they were Fortune 50 companies. They were mega companies. Conversely, the firearms industry, even the largest, the Smith & Wesson, the Rugers, they are barely small cap companies. They're small. And so the cost to them of litigation is much higher and much more dangerous. So, not for what could be discovered, but just the cost on their bottom line. It could put them out of business, just the expenses.
Right, because court. Trust me, if it's anybody who knows how expensive court cases can be, we know how expensive court cases, how expensive these particular cases can be. But I mean, what really gets me once again is they believe that they're gonna be able to find and get information. Oh well, they're specifically marketing to children, and they're trying to get. And what the other thing that I don't understand about this whole particular lawsuit is we're talking about a company that, if anything, is marketing and advertising the exercising of a constitutionally enumerated right.
You're absolutely correct. However, the gun prohibitionist, the anti gun lobby, has been gunning for, no pun intended, the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act for a long time. And they've got politicians on their side. They're looking for ways that they could pierce the veil of it. And they think that once they've pierced it, they will destroy the gun industry.
Right, because they're hoping basically. I mean, especially when you've got groups like when you got individuals like Michael Bloomberg who are literally willing to dump hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, and it won't even put a dent in his wallet.
No.
But when you have someone who's willing to contribute those sorts of resources to litigation, yeah, it would be hard for any company not to eventually wind up being bankrupt. And that's, their whole thing is they realize they can't take away the right to keep and bear arms, but they can do everything possible to affect that, like going after manufacturers, making it so that they can't afford to stay in business, going after retailers, making sure they can't stay in business through zoning practices, and through overregulation and zoning practices. Once again, making it almost impossible for them to locate their business anywhere.
Well, you're absolutely correct. And as I understand it, the retailer in this case went bankrupt a long time ago, closed his shop within months after the Newtown shootings. And he was put out of business.
Right. An individual who did absolutely nothing wrong. He sold a legal product to a law abiding citizen. Unfortunately, someone who shouldn't have gotten a hold of that firearm got a hold of that firearm and used it against that law abiding citizen.
That law abiding citizen who also went through an FBI background check.
Exactly. Well, we all know the whole push for universal background checks when we all know that for the most part, the overwhelming majority, when I say overwhelming, we're talking over 90% of the crime guns that are actually found used in crimes are, by the way, not in the possession of the person who actually owns it, meaning they obtain that firearm illegally.
That's exactly right.
If we could find a way to get the criminals to go through background checks, that's what we ought to do. See, if you're a criminal, we should require you to go through a background check. That's a law.
But wait, do criminals obey the law? And the answer is no. That's why
No.
they're criminals.
No, exactly. That is why they are criminals. What do you believe the likelihood that this particular lawsuit will go anywhere? Number one, and then number two. Now I understand that. First let's do that one first. What do you believe the likelihood of this lawsuit actually going anywhere, and what do you believe the final disposition of this case will probably be?
Well, number one, Remington has asked for a stay of the ruling while they appeal to the Supreme Court. And they should get the stay because under Connecticut law, under federal law, they are entitled to a stay because making them go through the burdens of litigation, discovery, motion practice will cause them irreparable harm just from the cost. I would think that a legitimate court would give them the stay. Whether or not the U.S. Supreme Court will take this up, I'm not sure. I have seen discussions saying that the court would actually rather take it up after they have lost at the district court level, at the Connecticut Supreme Court level, after it has gone to trial. That said, you're dealing with the supremacy of federal law and the supremacy clause. Um, the the dissenting minority in this case clearly recognized it. They clearly recognized the intent of Congress with the PLCAA, um, and they said that there is just no way under federal law that this case should ever have gone forward. Usually, what has happened in the past in many districts is that when you have a claim of protection of lawful commerce and arms act, it is transferred to federal court, and you have the U.S. attorney for that district pulling it into federal court. Here you did not. Bear in mind that at the time, the U.S. attorney for Connecticut was appointed by President Obama. So therefore, the likelihood of them actually pulling it into federal court was probably slower or slim.
Right.
And the sad thing is, actually, the majority decision in this case was written by a Republican who had been appointed U.S. Attorney for Connecticut by George H.W. Bush and had been appointed to the Supreme Court by former Governor Lowell Weicker, a Republican.
You know what's frustrating to me is that it seems like we never hear about Democrat judges being kind of the swing vote on anything or jumping sides. It always, for some reason, seems to be Republican appointed judges who we tend to lose. And I'm not saying we lose every Republican judge, but it seems all too often that judges appointed by Republicans, there is no guarantee that they're going to be faithful to the principles upon which they claimed when they were appointed to their position.
I agree with you fully. And what makes it even more remarkable is that the dissent in this case was written by the Chief Justice of the Connecticut Supreme Court, who was an African American, an ardent Democrat, had been state level with the NAACP, liberal credentials out the wazoo, pristine, and he was the one who recognized it, and he was the one who said no.
Well, I think in his position, probably a lot of it probably came from the fact that if you're going to literally ignore the supremacy clause, think about, in particular in the South, how many civil rights laws would be undone in states throughout the South if you're not going to respect the supremacy clause. And that's probably my guess is that's where he was coming from. Probably didn't have, I don't know if it had anything to do with guns, but if I'm guessing, in particular with an NAACP background, that was probably where he was leaning.
Very well could be.
Exactly. So, hey, before we let you go, tell us a little bit about your website and how you came up with the name.
Well, I've been blogging since 2010, so I'm almost at my 9th year. The name came from the Warren Zevon songs and Lawyers, Guns, and Money. I'm not a lawyer, but I am a financial planner. I had planned originally to do a lot, some financial advice and a lot of guns. My employer said, we don't want you doing any financial advice. You can't even tell people you're a financial planner. Don't even mention who you work for. So I stayed with the fun stuff, the guns.
No lawyers, only guns and money. I never had even heard of that song until I started reading your blog. Then I had to go listen to it. But hey.
Well, you're too young. That's
Thanks, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming on the program. We very much appreciate you and look forward to having you back.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really do appreciate it.
All righty. We'll look forward to it in the future. All right, folks. Well, hey, that's going to be it for today's Coffee with Craig. We very much appreciate you guys tuning in. We appreciate you liking and sharing this program, telling your friends about the Firearms Policy Coalition, because as you know, we are the home in the fight for civil rights. Got to use them or you're going to lose them. You guys take care.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.